couple of minutes, and then we'll ask Lord Bruce to open the session. Thank you. Who are you? I'm Humphrey Hawksley. Hi. On the other side? Okay. So, I pronounce your name Taha Siddiqui. Yes, that's fine. And I pronounce your name Fatemeh Aman. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
So yours open whenever, and then how many minutes do you have?
10 to 15.
10 to 15, I was 20 minutes.
Okay, if you've got 20 minutes, you can rush it, fine. It's just we're running a bit late, and I want to get us back on the schedule. So if you could, yeah. I'm sure you can improvise.
I have a presentation to give.
You'll be brilliant.
That's a good excuse now.
Yeah, you can say, yeah, Humphrey's rushing me and I'm going to make a mess of it. And
should I set it up right now? Because then...
And you don't have that point, do you?
Yeah, so it's over here, and then I'll tell you how to set it up.
That's what I decided not to use it. I decided
Okay.
not to use it. I just have 2 slides. It's
Oh,
just
that's
Iran
okay.
map.
Yeah, and they're all set up, are they?
Yes, I'm going to.
Do you have slides also?
Hello, everybody. We're now going to begin. Thank you so much for coming, and I hand you over to Lord Bruce.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Democracy Forum. There's going to be a slight change in the format this afternoon, because before we start the seminar today, I would like to take a moment to share a deep and heartfelt tribute to Tom Deegan, whose sudden and unexpected death on April the 10th came as a great shock to all who knew him. Tom was with the Democracy Forum since its inception in 2009. He was a linchpin of this organization, serving as its vice chairman. An outspoken advocate of free speech, human rights, and democratic governance, he closely followed the politics of South Asia. Tom was always vocal and very well informed in his views about a wide range of issues. His role in TDF was manifold. He attended many meetings, he cultivated important contacts, he suggested many ideas for the seminars, which so many of you have attended and participated in over the years. And as in any small organization, TDF enjoys something of a family atmosphere, and Tom was very much a mainstay of the family. He is sorely missed. His passion and interest in the state of the world, the need for fairer social systems, his humanity and kindness, his helpfulness, generosity of spirit, all these qualities made him a dear friend as well as a colleague. Well, this is our first seminar without him, but we will always remember him. And I'd like to thank all of you who've written in with messages of support. In his youth, Tom joined the Merchant Navy, which spawned a love of travel and opened his eyes to other cultures. He spoke passable Spanish and even managed a few words in Urdu, although with an Irish accent. He was a great book lover, and he once ran a small publishing house. He edited and translated 2 works by the writer Muhammad Amirana, Gateway to Terrorism, and its sequel, The Seeds of Terrorism. And of course, he also wrote regularly for Asian Affairs magazine. So on your behalf today, I would like to dedicate this seminar to the memory of Tom Deegan. And I think it would be a fitting legacy to him if we continue to expose the iniquity of political injustice, the erosion of free speech, and the denial of human rights throughout South Asia. Indeed, in his final contribution to Asian Affairs magazine, a journal which so clearly mirrored his worldview, in his last article, published only a week before he died, he reminded us of the terrible injustices inflicted on the Bangladeshi people in the traumatic period following partition in 1947. As a writer of conviction, Tom wielded his pen like a warrior to avenge the memory of those who suffered at the hands of the West Pakistan Army in 1971. And as a writer of great feeling and sensitivity, he reserved his utter scorn for the attempt to use Urdu as a weapon of destruction to supplant Bangla, a language so rich in poetry and literature, as he described. Many of us gathered here today are writers, and along with Tom, we're all committed to the freedom of writers everywhere to speak the truth and, where necessary, to confront powerful vested interests. As Seamus Heaney reminds us of the essential role of the writer in society, that is, to persuade that vulnerable part of our consciousness of its rightness in spite of the evidence of wrongness all around it. The power to remind us that we are hunters and gatherers of values, and that our very solitudes and distresses are creditable insofar as they too are an earnest of our veritable human being. And finally, I turn to Rabindranath Tagore, the Bengali poet and the first Asian to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913, who wrote the following lines from Baghdad in 1932, and which contain within them a sense of what Tom strove for, and consequently how his life enriched and stimulated us. The night has ended. Put out the light of the lamp of thine own narrow corner, smudged with smoke. The great morning, which is for all, appears in the east. Let its light reveal us to each other who walk on the same path of pilgrimage.
Thank you, Lord Bruce. That was a very fitting and moving tribute to Tom, who we're all missing very much here. I'm Humphrey Hawksley. I'm a correspondent and author, and we are discussing today cross-border terrorism, challenges in South Asia and its neighbourhood. And as a younger correspondent, I cut my teeth in that area whereby every story I seemed to be covering was about cross-border terror. Whether it was smuggling arms into Sri Lanka from Tamil Nadu, whether it was the Punjab terror crisis in the 80s that seamlessly seemed to close down and then move up to Kashmir, which ebbs and flows constantly, or in the Northeast Asia region beyond the Chicken's Neck. It seemed to be a never-ending melee of insurgencies. And I learned a couple of things about insurgencies, or came to the conclusion about them. And perhaps it came to me when I was doing something else in Lebanon some years later. And there had been a flare-up, and there was talk of another civil war in Lebanon. And I went up to see the Druze leader, a man named Walid Jumblat, in his castle in the mountains. And I walked into his living room and library, and there was a Soviet Union anti-aircraft gun in the window, pictures of Lenin and various Soviet memorabilia, because his forces had been supported then by the Soviet Union in this proxy Cold War. And I said to Walid Jumblat, I said, what is the chance of this war happening again, rising up again? And he shook his head, he said, no. He said, in order to have a war or an insurgency of any note, you have to be supported with money from big powers. And no big powers are going to be supporting any side in Lebanon now. And then I went back and thought of the ones that I had covered, and even the ones that were in my own country, like the troubles in Northern Ireland, which raised money from the Irish community in Boston. And you think, yes, you might have your terrorist and his so-called local element there, but actually it's all much bigger than that. And that's why we have got a superb panel of specialists today that's going to drill down on these issues. And first session, we've got Fatemeh Aman, who's a non-resident senior fellow, Southeast Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, which is in Washington. That's right, one of my favorite think tanks, I just have to say. And she's going to talk about Iran and the regional context that we get from Iran. And then we're going to have Taha Siddiqui, who is the founder of safenewsrooms.org. Follow it on Twitter right now. And he's going to talk about something very interesting about these big institutions like tracking the money, the UN, other international bodies to get Pakistan. How do we work out Pakistan and that sort of schizophrenic element that it has with its jihadi proxies in the South Asia region? I've asked them to talk for about 15 minutes each because we want to try to close up the lateness that we're running on. So, Fatemeh, over to you.
Should I go there?
You can do whatever, however you're comfortable.
If you don't mind, I'll
Sure, yeah.
All right, got it. Oh, it's there. I left it there.
Is it there? Do you put it on?
Yes, please. Do you mind?
This,
Yes, yes, thank you. Just the first two, that's all I need.
yeah.
So which one?
That one, the PowerPoint, but just the first two slides. Yeah, these two. First
The
two
technology will work.
Right now. It's all right. It's fine.
Good.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I really feel honored among this, to be at this amazing event and with distinguished guests. I was originally told that I can talk for 20 minutes. You
I'm sorry.
cut that 20 minutes to 10 to 15 minutes, so I will improvise. So, I mean, any mistake that I will make is because of time. As he mentioned, you know, I'm going to just focus on Iran border region and insurgency, you know, how the fight that Iran has been involved with cross-border terrorism and insurgency. I will, since I don't have enough time, I'm going to cut things, just go to the western part of the country, which neighbors Iraq and Turkey all have troubled regions, you know, Kurdistan, both Turkey and Iraq have Kurdistan region with a very long history of insurgency and fight for independence and separatism. And then I would move to the eastern part with Afghanistan and will try to focus on Pakistan border region with Iran, you know, mainly Balochistan. Iranian authorities' response to cross-border terrorism and to and insurgency have been impacting also internal politics of Iran and its relation with its South Asian neighbors, so especially with Pakistan, obviously. I will argue that cross-border terrorism, which usually finds ground through cultural and linguistic similarities on both sides of the borders, can impact internal politics as well, as I just mentioned. So it can radicalize and brutalize government responses and increase mistrust toward its own citizens. It can also increase dissatisfaction among the population and ultimately lead to a vicious cycle of violence. And it can also obviously deepen differences and conflicts in the regional level. Root causes of terrorism in Iran in different regions, despite some similarities, as I just mentioned, based on linguistic and cultural similarities, there also have some characteristics. For instance, in the western part, the insurgent groups and terrorist groups are more, there is more ideological conviction. However, on the eastern side, for example, in Balochistan, it's based on the extreme poverty, unemployment, and discrimination, lack of religious freedom, and things that are really causing more trouble for Iran. Let me just give you an example of a former President Rouhani's, deputy who visited Balochistan part of Iran, and he said in an interview, I quote, she said she went to a village, remote village in Balochistan, and there was no man in that village because everybody was hanged because somehow involved in drug trafficking just to earn some few dollars to provide for their families. So poverty is the main driving factor in eastern part neighboring Pakistan, and ideology more on the western part with Iraq and Turkey. Iran, everybody knows this cat. This is a map of Iran. Iran is like a sitting cat. How can I go to, yeah, that's Iran.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I make a suggestion? If you move just a little bit away from the microphone.
Oh, can I
think
just...
it's distorting just a little bit. I'm wondering if moving it further away...
Did you have to wait so long? Okay.
Do you want to try now?
We can see the neighborhood now of Iran. So Iran has a very unique geographical location. It connects South Asia and Oman Sea to the Middle East, and then to Central Asia to Europe. All neighborhood, as I mentioned, all neighboring countries have troubled region. Both Iraq, Turkey in the northwest, and Khuzestan, a province in Iran with a large Arab population, also neighbor to Iraq. On the east, which we will be focusing, is Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I wish I could show you a list of all these Kurdish and separatist and leftist and secular insurgent groups in the eastern part, western part. I'm sorry, we are now in Kurdistan. Just remember. But what I was going to mention, and just maybe a minute or so, on the Salafi groups, Salafi insurgent groups in the western part, in Kurdistan. They are Jaish Sahabe, Khatib Qaid fi Kurdistan, Ansar al-Islam, Kurdistan Islamic Emirate, some of these prominent groups. Their existence was mainly ignored by the government, and it turned out that some of these Salafi groups enjoyed the support from the government, from some intelligence community, I would say. You wonder why Iran would support, its own insurgent groups. The reason was that they thought it would be the best and most effective mean to fight, lefties, NGOs, civil societies, and since the Salafis reject any type of statehood, they thought they would be the best candidate to fight, other insurgents. And also, the Salafis were also at odds with the moderate religious leader. So they thought, in case Iran is attacked from the United States, these Salafis who are not looking for a state, for a country, they would be the best mean and tool to, fight U.S. forces. And I will move quickly to Afghanistan and then focus on Pakistan. How much time do I have now?
You just take your time. I mean, tell us the whole story. Don't feel too
All
pressured.
right.
Yeah.
That's too late now. That's all right. So, for a very long time, their main, the group that that Iranian government was afraid of, obviously, was Taliban. Then, ISIS or ISK, Islamic State Khorasan. Khorasan is a name that implies to part of Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iran. It's also a name of a province in the eastern part of Iran. With the rise of ISIS, they found, Iranian government, found itself, they were really surprised, and they thought ISIS could be could touch their weak point. They thought they are Salafis, they are tenfold more brutal than Taliban, they reject any statehood, so they can do harm to Iranian security in the eastern border. And that is when they started getting closer to Taliban. So before rise of ISIS in Afghanistan, their main communication channel with Taliban was based on the, providing Taliban with explosives just to make the life of US troops, very hard in Afghanistan. So to prevent that Afghanistan could be used as a base to conduct a military attacks against Iran. But with the rise of ISIS, they concluded that Afghanistan government is not strong enough, and Taliban is gaining more territory, and ISIS obviously more brutal. They thought they need Taliban support. That's why you heard that Mullah Mansour went to Iran for some medical treatments or whatever, and they, then they openly defended getting closer to Taliban. So if you hear me, I do believe that Iran is interested in a peace talk between Taliban and Afghan government, unlike things that we hear in Washington. So, and now Pakistan. With Pakistan, it's completely different issue between, Iran border with Pakistan. First of all, it didn't start with the Islamic Revolution in 1979. It has been going on, before the revolution with Shah. Shah put his full support behind Pakistani government and military support behind Pakistani military to crack down on Baluchi separatists and Baluchi insurgents. And there are the groups that we hear, Jundullah, Harkat Ansar Iran, and Jaish Hussein, they all evolved from Jundullah. After if you remember, Abdul Malik Rigi was captured by Iranian military forces with the help of Pakistanis, and he was hanged along with his brother. Jaish al-Adl and Jaish al-Nasr. There is one trend that we have to, that we should not ignore, is that in the beginning, they would tolerate each other's insurgency on both sides, but at one point, Iranians started shelling some bases in Pakistani territory, and in 2014, Pakistani for the first time returned the fire. Some of you remember a guard was killed, a Pakistani was killed, and things started getting south. So the most recent attack happened 2017. I'm sorry, just a couple months ago, 2019, that's when they really got impatient. Qasem Soleimani, the commander of IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, stated, got very vocal against what he described as Taliban's in action, saying, you have atomic bomb and you cannot stop a group of 200 or 300 insurgents, as if atomic bomb would stop any insurgency. So Iranians think that Pakistani government and military either tolerate cross-border attacks against Iran. They think that the military is incapable of preventing and stopping these terrorist groups. They believe that elements between ISI and Pakistani military, with backing from some Arab rivals of Iran, are actively supporting these militants, and they think Pakistan is too obsessed with India that it completely ignores its border with Iran. But as I mentioned before, Pakistan has occasionally helped Iran, curbing on the militants, including that 2010, capturing Abdul Malik Rigi. That also some Iranian believe that. You see, that's the reason why Pakistan was behind it, because they could catch the Rigi so easily. Anyway, it's just that the response has been is getting more violent, and so far Iran has tried not to use ethnic cards inside Pakistan, but they know that it could backlash, and Pakistan is already plagued, I would describe that region, with insurgency and instability. So more insurgency would also obviously spill over into Iran and would harm Iran as well. Let me just mention that with using extremism in the Middle East, it has been repeating over and over and over, and it looks that no one is learning anything from it. They should obviously come to the conclusion that enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, and I don't know how long it would take for them to learn that. That I would stop here, and hopefully I will get a chance to say more in Q&A section.
You're way early.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Do you want to make another point?
Okay, one
Thank
more
you.
point. So just that the cross-border terrorism is really threatening the entire region. That is for sure. What could stay local in the past is now spread and is can fuel the instability in the entire region. And the religious extremism is on the rise. Borders are porous. Weapons are very easy to access. And with all this, and poverty is getting severe, more severe. So with all this in mind, it doesn't look that I personally am not too optimistic that insurgency and cross-border terrorism would stop anytime soon. And unless there is regional cooperation and intelligence sharing, which in that part of the world, as I said, I'm not terribly optimistic. That's something the solution would come to.
Thank you. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Not least in the detail. And I just want to pick up before we move on, is that the big players there, Iran and Pakistan, those governments, has there been any change of thinking in the governments over, say, the past 20 or 30 years on how all these groups and that should be dispersed or increased, or that scenario you painted? Has there been anything substantive?
You mean both, governments talking with each other? Because
not
they don't.
Talking. I'm just looking at the map. Iraq and Afghanistan have had complete upheavals, but Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, these have all been pretty much steady governments for 20 or 30, between ups and downs. Has there been anybody that's saying we need to fix this?
That's not the right timing. There is, but I really hated to say that I'm not optimistic at all. They obviously have their own internal issues right now. I mean, consider Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not going to stop anytime soon in using proxies and financing, insurgency in certain areas. And with Iran, as I mentioned, I know when I said that the Salafi groups enjoyed the support from the in Iran's intelligence community, that is, think about it. This is disastrous, and they ignored their existence until 2017 when they hit the heart of Iran, in tomb of Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of Islamic Revolution, and the Majlis, and they attacked the parliament. That was when, they noticed that, this is not the reasonable way to fight other insurgents with more insurgency. So I don't see any. I don't know if I answered your question, but sometimes you try to prevent harm to yourself, but sometimes you start thinking of some treatment or medication when it's too late. I'm not saying that's too late for Iran, but it's going to take some time until they find out that they really that's not the right and reasonable mean to confront their other issues.
Thank you. Can we give Fatemeh a huge round of applause?
Thank you. Should I come back or sit somewhere else? Do you want me to hear again, or can I sit there?
You can sit. Oh, come and sit here. We've got the three of us. Your name's there. Yeah. Taha Siddiqui is now going to drill down.
I'm going to continue with the format.
I'll continue, and then after that we're going to have a question and answer session that's going to take us a little past 3:30, when we're going to have some coffee, and then we're going to resume with two more brilliant speakers.
So I just have a presentation to put up too. Yes, I did that. Yes, just a second. Because I don't want everyone to see the USB. Thank you. Did you throw? Vinny. Oh, you've got some. I'll put it away. Okay, great. Cancel. Wait a second. Just a second. I'll copy the PDF. Yeah, let's see if this works. Yeah, this is fine. F11. Wait. How do you do full screen? We do full screen. F5. Control L. Yeah, that's fine. And then we do this. Wait. Oh, sorry. And duplicate. It should be back. Yes, it works. Great. Hello, everyone. So just to introduce myself a little bit more, I'm a Pakistani journalist. I used to report in Pakistan up until 2018, January last year. Then I moved to Paris recently because of an incident that happened. I was almost kidnapped, and possibly there was an assassination plot in Pakistan in January last year. So then I moved to Paris, and I live in Paris now. And in exile, I basically continue to write on Pakistan and continue to write about issues concerning Pakistan in the international press. And basically, the previous presentation was more about, Iran, Pakistan. I will be focusing on Pakistan and something to do with something that I have been writing about, and it's very current affairs based, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body that looks after terrorism financing and money laundering, and they've been focused on Pakistan for the very recent months, and Pakistan has been put on the grey list, and there's a review happening. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then also United Nations and other countries, and basically, as earlier on, the last speaker, Amna, she mentioned about how there's regional cooperation to look into, but also there are international commitments that Pakistan has and should fulfill. And I'll be focusing on that and what kind of action or pressure Pakistan should face for doing what it is doing in the region. So that's basically going to be the presentation about. And to begin with, I would like to go a little bit into the history of Pakistan's sort of obsession with jihadi proxies in the region and the reason behind each of that. And usually people talk about just a second. How do you go to the next one? Yes. So people usually talk about the time period of the 80s and the Ziaul Haq era and the Soviet anti-Soviet war era and how there was this Talibanization. But I'd like to take people a little bit back and go to the origins of this idea of using jihadi proxies or using proxies. And the first time Pakistan did that was all the way back in 47 and 48, which is sort of not in the imagination of Pakistanis today, because there's a fabricated history that is taught in which India is shown as the aggressor, whereas there was the invasion in 1947 and 48. And there's a very recent book written by Anam Zakaria called Between the Great Divide, and it talks about that whole idea of what happened in Kashmir. She's done some interviews in the so-called Azad Kashmir, as it's called, independent Kashmir, from the Pakistan side or the Pakistan administered side. And so basically, that was the first time the Pakistanis used Pashtuns and the tribals to invade, and then followed it up with the military. Then another aspect that is missing from the history and discussion is about the Al-Shams and Al-Badr, which was used in 1971 in Bangladesh, the whole East Pakistan, West Pakistan movement. And it was sent as a proxy. Also, again, Jamaat Islami was involved in it, and the Pakistani state was involved in it. So that is also before the time period of the Soviet era, where we saw the institutionalization of the proxies. And then Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who's many at times thought to be the liberal, left-wing, and sort of like open to ideas of democracy and things like that. He also was involved with, back in the 1970s, with Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who was invited into Pakistan, was very close to the Pakistani state. And this was sort of after the fall of Dhaka, that they thought that there was a Pashtunistan movement happening, and they had to counter that. So they brought in these Islamists. And this is, again, before the Americans or the CIA money came in, or the Saudi money came in later on, which is the jihadis of the Soviet era, the anti-Soviet era, and how Pakistan was involved in that. But then the international players also came, the Saudis came, and the CIA money came. Then during the late 80s, basically, the Americans left the region, the Saudi interest went down with the whole fall of the Soviet, and then these jihadis were moved a little bit. I mean, there are different names. There's many multiple names, as the previous speaker was mentioning, but they're all more or less jumping from one group to the other, as far as I've seen while reporting in Pakistan, according to the crackdown that is happening on them, or the cosmetic crackdown rather. And then the Kashmir uprising happened in the 90s, so that's the timeline that we see when in the early 90s there was a lot of violence and bloodshed happening in Kashmir. Most of these people had gone from or got trained during the anti-Soviet era and then moved towards the Kashmiri side, the Indian Kashmir side in the 90s. We see the Taliban government happening in the late 90s, which eyewitnesses say that the Pakistan military was involved in that. It was in Kandahar at that time. There were serving officers involved in it. Then we have the 9/11 to the present, where we have the combination of Kashmir-focused groups like, for example, Lashkar-e-Taiba, which today is known as Jamaat-ud-Dawa or Falah-e-Insaniyat Foundation or Milli Muslim League, whatever name you want to call them. They keep changing. That's the way they operate to fool the media and fool the international authorities. Then you have the Afghan-focused militant groups, which are basically, one of them is the Haqqani Network, which is based out of the tribal belt mostly. Then you have the ones which is the Quetta Shura, which is in Balochistan, right outside Quetta in Kuchlak city. They've been operating from there for a very long time on the Chaman border. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then there are the Sunni militant groups or the extremist groups which are focused on Iran or, for example, Islamizing Pakistan from within. In the Gilgit-Baltistan region, in the Balochistan region, there's to counter the nationalist movement there, the Baloch nationalist movement, they've inducted or sort of introduced Sunni militant groups or madrasas, which are also Saudi-backed. We'll come to that too. So that's a bit of a history of jihadis in Pakistan that continue to exist, and a timeline that I wanted everyone to be at the same level as me. And some of you know this, I'm sure. But just to go back to the idea of why have proxies, and this is, I wrote a piece in the Foreign Policy very recently. It's called Rich Army, Poor Nation. It was in March, it came out. And this is an excerpt from there. And basically, I'm just going to read it out. And it's the military mainly protects itself by keeping the threat of India alive, which is what the earlier speaker also talked about in Pakistan. And the two nuclear-armed neighbors have been in conflict since the partition of South Asia in 1947. The militaries have fought 4 wars, with 3 of them over Kashmir Valley. Even though Pakistan initiated these conflicts, it has told the public that it was only countering Indian aggression. In recent years, Pakistan has avoided a direct war, perhaps because it lost all the previous ones, but it relies on militant groups based in Pakistan to keep the tensions alive. Why does it do that? And we saw in this February, we saw the glimpse of such dynamics at play when the whole incident happened in Balakot, and before that, the 40 soldiers that were killed in Kashmir, the Pulwama incident. And then in turn, so the Pakistan army gets the perfect excuse at home for its oversized burden on the country's economy, like a mafia protection racket. I wrote it as it is in Foreign Policy, which is good. The military creates its own demand in Pakistan, and that's basically where the proxies, why have proxies come in. With Afghanistan, we've seen that from Russian threat to the Indian threat. Earlier it was the Russians are coming, and then now it's the Indians. You've probably all have heard of this whole idea that there are 20 consulates on the border, and they're like constantly operating from there. Even though, most of the border region between Pakistan and Pakistan and Afghanistan are being managed by pro-Pakistan Taliban groups. The Haqqani networks are there, and a lot of Afghan Taliban move through Chaman, and so it's usually both sides of that area. It's not the Indian consulates, which is what in popularly, like on WhatsApp groups, Facebook, social media, and even in the media, mainstream media in Pakistan, there's this paranoia that is sold. I remember I was in the GHQ, Pakistan military had organized this. It organizes this yearly workshop for journalists, and I was part of it many years ago. And over there, we talked about Afghanistan, and we were like, So, you know, they were showing us a map of Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and they were like, you know, our military is busy on the eastern border because of Indian threat and all that. And then we talked about on the Afghanistan side, and they were like, yeah, even the Indians are coming from that side. So there's this paranoia that India is also now coming in from Afghanistan that used to be Russia before. Then with Iran, there's the paranoia that exists from the 1979 revolution onwards, that the Iranians have some linkages. Recently, in Pakistan, we saw a lot of Shias going missing. Then there were stories that were planted that these Shias were the ones who were being backed by Iran, or they're going to go fight in Syria. And even though there are a few of those cases true, but not as large as what was painted in the media and what has been, and then people went missing. And then there were the Shia protesters, they went out and camped outside the residence of the Pakistani president for almost 20 days, I think, if I'm not wrong. And then basically after that, the missing people, there were around 25, 30 missing people, and 17 or 18 of them showed up. None of them have been interviewed or are willing to give interviews, but we do know that they were with the Pakistan military. There were no charges placed against them, so there's no evidence, but then there's this paranoia, and then they act on this paranoia. Of course, there are some cases I mentioned, but not as much in what they say. So that's with Iran, Afghanistan, and India, as I explained. I just also would like to go into some of the reportage very quickly and sort of talk about, you know, my time investigating the jihadi groups in Pakistan. And basically, these are anecdotal evidences, of course, and my own personal experiences in reportage that I did over there. And I remember one of the places where you can actually see these militant proxies really operational on the street, interacting with the public, and really entrenched. In Punjab, for example, during the natural disasters, I've traveled with Jamaat-ul-Dawa, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and they go there and they're like, you know, I remember once I was in Multan a few years ago, and over there we talked about, we were with Jamaat-ul-Dawa, and we talked about, you know, I was like, why are you helping these people? And they were like, you know, they have 6 to 7 kids, this year they're in trouble, next year they will be fine, so they will dedicate one child to our cause. And the cause, of course, is to find foot soldiers for fighting in Kashmir or in Afghanistan. And so then Azad Kashmir, so-called Azad Kashmir, we've seen that happening in, you know, during the 2005 earthquake. And even currently, a friend of mine was in Muzaffarabad and was meeting up with the militant groups, or the charity groups, as they're referred to as there, with Jamaat-ul-Dawa. And they, you know, there's been a lot of hue and cry internationally. So they were like, yeah, we've just gone to our villages and we're just keeping it low, but, you know, we'll come back, and the names change. So that happens a lot. They do a lot of charity work, and they get into that. That's how they operate within the public. Then Balochistan is something that we need to talk about because it borders with Afghanistan, Iran, and it has Chinese interest now in it. And it's a hotbed of terrorist groups. And how it operates is that there is, as I mentioned, in Quetta city, outside Quetta city, there's the good Taliban. In Chaman border, for example, I was talking to someone there, and he was telling me how there's constant movement of the Taliban from the border, off the border, and I have also, I remember being in Balochistan in 2017, where I met some military soldiers who, through a contact, and we got down to sort of having a frank discussion, and they told me about how their seniors would take convoys into, and this is as recent as 2017, that they would take convoys into Afghanistan off the border, and they had the juniors had problems with that, but the seniors were doing that, and they were like, if we complain, it goes onto our file, we won't have a career progression. So it's the military, how it operates, that the military creates this, you know, within the juniors, even they come into to fight the Taliban, but then they realize there's the good Taliban, the bad Taliban, and they learn that from the seniors, so the policy hasn't changed for a very long time. Which brings me to the good Taliban in former FATA, which is not called FATA anymore. It's been merged with the KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa itself, where there is the good Taliban, as they're called, which are tolerated in many of the areas locally. And we're starting to hear about reports from the people, again from North Waziristan, from the tribal belt, that they're coming back and settling in after the whole operation that happened, where they either bombed empty houses, as far as from what I understand. I reported on the Zarbiya's operation in North Waziristan. I went to Bannu, and then I've been to South Waziristan, and it's basically they relocate, they keep relocating them, and they're again coming to those areas. And then the Gilgit-Baltistan Islamization project is also very important, where I've reported from, and I saw how they're bringing in Sunni extremist groups there. For example, in Chilas, there used to be a Babe Chilas, it's called Babe Umar now. Things like that happening on ground, you see, and again, it's because there's a paranoia. If you talk to the security personnel deputed in Gilgit-Baltistan area, they think Iran is doing something there. So the paranoia, even though if Iran, we don't have any evidence to share that, but they crack down with that whole idea of bringing in madrasas and Islamists into this region. Finally, this is
Couple of minutes. Yeah.
Couple of minutes, yes. Thank you. Just to go back to the initial thing that I was mentioning, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and the UN commitments that Pakistan has, and then can they pressure Pakistan into changing its course? The review is due next month in June. They're meeting up, and they're going to discuss whether or not to keep Pakistan in the grey list or put it on the blacklist. Pakistan has been on the blacklist before, and Pakistan hasn't done enough, as I mentioned, how when it comes to these terror groups, then the financing is involved, the money is moving around, there's a lot of money laundering and terror financing that's happening in the guise of charities. So whether or not it'll go to grey list or blacklist, that's some kind of, Pakistan has been facing a lot of pressure because of that, and they've been trying to do some cosmetic actions on ground. We saw the UN recently designated Maulana Masood Azhar as a global terrorist who's part of Jaish-e-Mohammed after the whole Balakot and Pulwama incident, after China withdrew its reservations on that. And so because of that, we've seen Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is also reincarnated in many ways and many times, has gone a little bit underground, but they still are there managing a lot of things. We saw that they were going to take over their madrasas and then take over their seminaries and their mosques, Jaish-e-Mohammeds and Lashkar-e-Taibas and all of these Kashmiri militant groups. But then there was a story that recently came out in which they said we don't have the money or the capability or the resources. So they're basically asking for more money, which is what Pakistan does: ask for more money, on ground, do nothing, then keep repeating that cycle. It's been doing that with the Americans for a very long time. Perhaps it'll do that with China now. We've seen that Balochistan is becoming really hot in that way. And then the military manipulates the local and international media. Local media has mostly gone silent, cannot independently report. International media now has only embedded trips where they take them to embedded reporting, which is sort of a control reporting. I've done those trips where you cannot see anything independently, and they are trying to do that in Balochistan, in the tribal belt, and send a message internationally that we're doing something through these embedded reporting trips. So just a solution in the end. I think, there are people from all over the world here, international people who are working with international bodies. The idea that Pakistan, if you really want to assess what's going on, I suggest that there are networks in Pakistan, which is for example, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is going on right now, which we saw that recently they killed 13 of their civilians in North Waziristan, the Pakistan military, and it's a movement that's been going on since the last 1.5 years over extrajudicial killings that happened of the Pashtuns, and it's a rising movement, and this is something that everybody should watch out for, should trust their point of view and version on Pakistan and see what they're talking about. They're on social media. They're not covered by the mainstream media in Pakistan. There are Baloch groups also which we should look into and talk to, and other ethnic and sectarian groups to really assess the situation in Pakistan rather than relying on the conventional or the traditional media or what the Pakistani government is saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Taha, for that. I just want to invoke Chairman's privilege on one question before we go to the Q&A. You left in January 2018 because what's it like? What's it like to not be able to go and do the job that you thought you were put on this earth to do, which is report your country?
So, I mean, when I tell people that I'm in Paris, and this happened last night, I was at an event, and they were like, so where are you from? I was like, I live in Paris. And they're like, oh, exotic. So, but at the same time, I had to leave. I didn't have choice. It was either because I could have been killed, and I was told that there's an assassination plot also. So exile has been really difficult. It's an experience as we go around. It's been 15 months right now. I'm with my wife and my kid there, but at least I have the safety of being alive and continuing to talk about Pakistan, which was much more important to me than the materialistic comforts that I had in Pakistan, because I had a good job, I had a good life, everything was fine, but I did not have the intellectual independence that I wanted to say or do what I wanted to do. So because of that, I realized now that I'm abroad, and definitely given the fact that I have friends and family and networks locally, which I am interacting with. Safe Newsrooms, that project that I run, is a website that talks about media censorship. So I talk to a lot of journalists still who I grew working with. They were colleagues of mine. So I try to keep in touch and continue to talk about Pakistan, but in safety. So that it came down to that. So.
Safe Newsrooms, that's what it's about.
Yes, and Safe Newsrooms, it actually stands for South Asians for Freedom of Expression, so SAFE, yeah. But it's also Safe Newsrooms to make your newsroom safe. So yeah, it's the safety that it came down to that, and that's why it's much, in a lot of ways it's better, but in a lot of ways it's not, and going away from home is never good.
Okay, come back here.
Thank you.
And we've got about 20 minutes for the questions and answers. What I'm going to try to do is take the first question and then group two others which will be on a similar topic. If you state who you are and if you're attached to any organization, if you're not, no matter, and keep your questions to a minute, please, so that we can get as many in as possible. This gentleman here was the first with his hand up, or the first that I saw.
First of all, congratulations on being very truthful. You are the first Pakistani journalist I've come across who has accepted that Pakistan has been training terrorists since 1947. My question to you and to the other two speakers on the platform is this: what can be done by right-thinking people to stop Pakistan train terrorists?
Thank you. Hold on a second.
Sorry, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but the gentleman is from New World, right? From Indian media. So according to World Economic Forum, India media, which is known for spreading fake stories, false propaganda.
Okay, this is going to be a courteous exchange of stuff. So this gentleman here. Okay, so you've made your point. Can you give us a very quick question?
I want to make the question. 13 innocent Pashtuns were
All right. Okay, thank you. Question over. You've had your minute. You've had your minute, sir. Please, please. Victoria, you have a question. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've got the UK being responsible and Pakistan being responsible. Let's get a question from over here. Okay, Taha, can you wrap up those three because they're all Pakistan? We'll go on to Iran for the next session of questions.
Well, just to begin with your question, when you mentioned, I believe Pakistan is a security state, and it will operate the way it is, and it has operated. It's played its geostrategic position very well within the global world when it comes to the US during post-47. With the whole Cold War era, and then and then recently with China coming into the equation. So the geostrategic positioning of Pakistan makes it into a country which will continue with more or less the same thing. And that's my view that I foresee. I don't know about the future, but that's what I foresee. Coming now to the other, that was just comments from those people, but from your question. The Valley of Kashmir, basically, I've also, until 2018 I was there, and I've traveled there multiple times, I have friends there, and as I mentioned recently, a friend of mine did a long investigative piece from both sides of the region. There's definitely an indigenous movement happening on the other side, on the Kashmir side, because of the Indian aggression and the way the Indians have been dealing with Kashmir. But at the same time, there's a lot of manpower and support and financial support that happens on the Pakistani side. As far as the camps questions are concerned, in Muzaffarabad or those areas where there used to be the camps in the 80s and the 90s, I'll give you an example very recently of the Balakot bombing that India claimed that it bombed in Balakot, which is in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a little bit close to adjacent to Kashmir. There is actually a Jaish-e-Mohammed seminary there. The Jaish-e-Mohammed seminary was 40 days after the Balakot bombing. Access was blocked to it. Eventually, they did take the media there. Again, as I mentioned, with the embedded reporting with the ISPR managing the crowd, and they took them to some parts of that madrasa, seminary, camp, or whatever. You see from the Google images, you see it's a much larger facility. They took them only to a very small place. And I have talked to people from that area in Balakot and people in that region. They do say that those trainings still happen, those camps still exist, but they've become much smarter because it's not the 1990s where there was only PTV and things were very, very controlled. They understand that the international media is there, they understand the social media, they understand this private media. So they've changed their tactics in the sense that, for example, Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is now known as Jamaat-ul-Dawa, back in 2014-15, was telling us when you would call them that, listen, we can't give interviews because we've been told not to give interviews, and we need to stay low because there's international pressure. So they've changed tactics and they've done that. So in that sense, so you do get to hear that and you get to see that, and so there's definitely a change of tactics as how they communicate with the media and with the academic world and with the global world.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question from.
Okay, hold on a second. Any questions about the Iran issue now? We're going to move on to the Iran issue. William, and then that gentleman there.
I have a question from you, actually.
Well, let's take that afterwards. Yeah.
My name is William Corley. I'm at the Federal Institute of Global Studies. I'd like to ask Mrs. Aman about your various talk. The general question is, to what extent does cross-border terrorism blend with and influenced by cross-border nationalism? I have particularly in mind the Kurdish situation, where you have Kurdish regarded as rebels and insurgents in Turkey, Kurds in Iran, not similarly regarded as rebels, quasi-independent Kurds in Iraq, all with a common national interest, crossing borders. To what extent are they responsible, influenced, do they react to cross-border terrorism?
Great question. Is this on the Iran issue? Okay.
My question is that how would you see the involvement of sectarian violence growing should Pakistan wish to participate in the Saudi alliance against terrorism?
And gentleman there, yes, please.
The Azeri question, because it seems that this is a sort of dormant nationalism, potential of escalating at some point. And I want to know to what extent Azeri nationalism could be a problem for the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Okay. Yes, do we have a roving mic for the questions? Oh, this one, yeah.
Khalid Alim, Citation Middle East Forum. How do you think drugs on the Iran, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan is fueling cross-border terrorism? This is affecting the populations as well in terms of addiction, but also who is involved, who is benefiting from this cross-border trade. And secondly, I just want a quick question. What do you see as in Chinese in Balochistan? Where there's been there's had a lot of attacks on Chinese citizens, and also in Gwadar, the port, to the extent that the Chinese said that they would withdraw from Balochistan if the attacks continued on their citizens. Can you give us some more detail about that?
I hope I can remember all of them because I just wrote words. Let me start with Saudi Pakistani, one of the gentlemen. Yes, the gentleman. It's very complicated. Iranians see, Saudi's presence and major financial support to Pakistan could impact Pakistanis or element within ISI, Pakistani military support for the insurgents, or promoting insurgency in the region. They see that. There is, however, one major difference to what they consider, Pakistan support for insurgency in Afghanistan. They don't think it's systematic as that of, Pakistan. Support for insurgents into Afghanistan. So they believe Pakistan is in financial, not so bright financial situation, and they are though hoping that, with Zarif, Foreign Minister Zarif going to Pakistan just a couple of days ago, trying to, they obviously cannot offer Pakistan the generous, zoom that Saudi offers, but they are trying to get involved in Gwadar, or just involve Pakistanis in Chabahar somehow, because they believe any multinational regional project could improve the security situation of the entire region, which has some truth to it, but I believe they would, now with the tension mounting between Iran and United States and the United States Arab allies, I believe Iran is looking for some friends, So we will see if Pakistan and, I can see a short-term, at least, alliance between China, Iran, and Pakistan. But like everything else in the past, it cannot last it cannot be permanent, since it will change with the, with the politics going on, foreign policy. Nationalism issue in Azerbaijan, yeah?
The Kurdish.
Oh, the Kurdish part. You see, that's where I, differentiated between the insurgency in the western part of Iran, between Iran, Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, Iraqi Khuzestan, Arab neighboring Arab to Khuzestan, to Iran's Khuzestan province, and Turkey and Iran. And then I said that it was different from that of eastern Iran, between Iran and Baluchistan. There is, on the western part, Kurdish nationalism is more secular. They are separatists. They are, it's been going on forever. It has roots in all these countries together, between Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. It is different in nature. So it is, there is obviously a bound between all these regions, and there is one region between Turkey, Iraq, and Iran where Kandil Mountain, where Kurds can move very easily, and it's like their home in a way. But in the western part, in the eastern part of Iran is Baluchistan, where I mentioned severe poverty and religious discrimination and ethnic discrimination, and things that is there could be solution really for insurgency in the eastern part of Iran, but the timing is not the best. It doesn't help Iran at this point.
Sorry, Lord, I need to ask a question from you, please.
We're going to get an answer here, then I'm going to come to you.
Of the Azerbaijan part?
But you only have about 30 seconds left out of your minute.
No, that might take.
So just to go back to the question here about the CPEC and Chinese involvement so from what we understand right now, the Chinese are reaching out independently to the Baloch. We have heard of reports of them reaching out to the European leadership also, which is in exile. In Balochistan, in China, there were some Baloch students that are studying recently. We found out that the Chinese authorities approached them to interrogate or interview them. We do know that even journalists are now being taken to Beijing. Recently, a delegation of journalists was taken to sort of assess the situation on ground. And as far as the CPEC is concerned, I mean, definitely there is this whole idea behind it that there's the trade route. But China has been trading with Pakistan for a very long time, rather dumping its goods in Pakistan for a very long time. From what we understand, the CPEC is more about strategic access in Gwadar and the sort of the seas and the waters there, and making a naval base there, which China itself, some media in China has talked about. China Post has done an article on this. As far as, then the local relationship is concerned right now, for example, in Gwadar, the many fishermen who have been dislocated and displaced from the region, and they're protesting, but the media is not covering that. And so there is a lot of local disillusionment from this Chinese investment coming in, and that it's not going to trickle down to the local people. It's going to just be a passage for Chinese themselves and the strategic waters, and that's all or less what it's going to be. And that's why we've seen the uptick in the attacks. We've seen that there was an uptick in attack inside Balochistan and in Karachi also. So there is that whole, of course, the southern part of Balochistan still has the insurgency ongoing, and that has picked up, and now they're actually, their tactics have changed a little bit. They're doing suicide bombings against Chinese interests in the region. So in the coming days, we might see that growing if the Pakistani, the policy doesn't change when it comes to involving and making the local people participate in this CPEC or the investment that is coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take two very quick questions, and then we're going to have a coffee break.
It's up to the chair.
If just speak, you've got a big voice.
No, I have a big voice, but
Okay, let's have a question over here, and then we'll get the mic to you.
There also, please.
Yeah.
Which way?
Hold on.
Okay.
This gentleman had his hand up first. Yeah.
Yeah, before him, actually, I would like to ask a question because he's not going to give me a mic. So about the Democracy Forum, I don't understand. On your website, it said about us, and it said who we are, what we stand for, and it says, to this end, for the past 8 years, the Democracy Forum has provided a platform for the people and blah blah society and blah 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 blah. I don't understand this forum has arranged almost 12 to 15 seminars in the last 4 or 5 years. And 70% or all of those seminars are against Pakistan. Let me mention
because Pakistan exposed terrorism.
Okay, stop. Okay, thank you. Thank you, yeah. Okay, thank you. Look, you've made your point. You've made your point. You have to sit down. This gentleman here. This gentleman here. This gentleman here, please. This gentleman here, please, with a question. Thank you. Hey, just ask the question.
Quickly, the Somali context that you mentioned, I just like to quickly highlight one thing. Right from partition, another very well documented historical fact is that respective Somali regime, different Somali regime who had kept interfering in Pakistan till the early 70s, encouraging the separate concept of Afghanistan, and when it was an NWFP. Afghanistan obviously was one of those few countries which had not. Hey, are you going to interrupt me?
All right. If we have any more of this, okay. We're going to break for coffee now and come back in 15 minutes. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, take a break. We're going to take a break for coffee. Answer, just go up to him and answer it. Yeah.
No, definitely, you're definitely right as far as the whole idea of Afghanistan's idea of the Durand line. They don't believe in that, and they think that yes, what we're talking about. So basically, definitely, I mean, it's an old sort of conflict that is ongoing because of the Durand line. They think that the agreement was done with the British, not with the Pakistani state. And definitely, in Pakistan, there is this perception that because they don't believe in it, and then there's the Pashtunistan movement that might exist. So, but at the same time, we do understand how, the state of what has been with Afghanistan for the last. I'm not having a discussion. I'm just answering. Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I just want to say a very quick thing about what I said at the beginning. I've covered a lot of insurgencies. A lot of stuff goes back deep into history. And there's a lot of shouting, like you got back here, whether it's in Ireland, or whether it's in Serbia, or whether it's in Cambodia. And I've sat in these things, and the sort of exchanges we have here don't help. They don't help. So all enjoy your coffee, and let's hope we can be more courteous when we return. I'll give you your question. You were rescuing me. Thanks. I'll check your website. You've got all that detail. Thank you for rescuing me.
So much for if you shout, you're right. Has Barry ever got in touch?
Yeah, he's here. He was at the back of the room. He had to walk out because he couldn't be seen to be endorsing what's going on. Yeah. It puts him in a horrible position as a politician. Yeah. He walked out. He gave me the eye. So I walked out there and he said, "Listen, I can't be in that room while that kind of discussion is going on."
What that guy said, I know he was being.
My feed is still on. Shall I pause it for what?
Is this?
No, not the sound. YouTube. It's still live on YouTube. Whatever is happening here.
Okay.
We can start. We can stop it now.
Yeah, maybe stop it and start it again.
It doesn't make sense to show what we're going
Yeah,
to do.
No. What we'll do, just focus it on the logo. I'll put the logo
Why
up.
somebody will watch that logo?
I don't think anyone.
But it just says it's like a break. Oh, I don't know.
Break it,
For a
stop it.
second.
Yeah? Or stop it.
If it's a break, I'll stop it.
Okay, fine.
It doesn't make sense.
All right.
No, I mean what he said about